Good morning everybody, welcome to the show on today. So lots of little stuff today, again, as per usual. So I noticed, Jace, you got your dad there today. I hope he enjoys the show. So anyhow, let's get on with what we're going to be doing. There are lots of questions last week, but I think I've answered all of them during the last couple of emails. So I think everything's pretty much sorted. So where I'm up to, what I've done during the week. This is the little box that I built initially to show you what we were doing, and I've fiddled around with it to get things right and just to work out some of the little things that I didn't quite get right during the process of building it. But now I've pretty much got it sorted, so it works really, really well. All I have to do now is cut off the brass bits and glue them in place and put a finish on it, and the box is basically done. So it's all sanded and all that sort of thing. So during the process of actually fiddling around with that one, working out what to do with it and how to go about fixing the little errors, I constructed the box that we built during the show last week. So, and this is it. So this is what it looks like. And then I realized once I put it together, I had nothing to show you. So I built another one. So this is the framework of that box. And instead of using red banks here, I've actually used a couple of pieces of walnut. So I've got a walnut and silver ash combination. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you how to assemble that. For some of you who haven't seen that before, this is the process I go through with each of the boxes. And then I'm going to dress this one up to fit the lid. That's the piece of material that I'm going to use for the lid. So we're going to make it look a little bit like that. So the process is going to be, just come in on this one, Pammy, on here. We're going to build that little part there, and we've got to build the lid before we actually start. So I'm going to make this little handle piece on the lid. I'm going to show you how to do that. Now that's a three-step process, and so we're going to deal with all of the processes necessary to get that sorted, and that'll be the first thing we do. And then we'll drill the holes in the back, which means we may have to make another little jig. So we'll see how far we get with it, and we'll take it from there. So that belongs to that, and that belongs to that, and let's get started. So the first thing we have to do is I need to put some feet in the bottom. If you look at the boxes, remember we put feet in the bottom. I tend to do that to most of the boxes that I build. It actually lifts it off the deck, and it also creates a shadow line underneath the box. So you can see the shadow line on there. It's quite a nice little shadow line, and it just gives it that little bit more class. So we're going to do that first, and then I'm going to glue the frame together, and then we'll go on with the rest of it. So the router bit that I'm going to use to do this won't be this one. So the router bit I'm using to cut the feet, TSRW 12. Okay, it's a straight spiral bit. Let me adjust the height. Like so. And you can see I'm just sticking a little bit above the router bit. It doesn't need to be a long way up. I like to sort of get it as low as possible without it interfering with anything. So it's going to be that high. Now we need a fence for that. Just put that aside. So the fence I'm using is my long one, and you can see that I've got cut out in the fence here. That is for the shape of this. So you can see this one's had a little bit of work, and it's going to need a little bit of repairing later down the track, but that's how it works. Now, when we cut the feet, just come in on this one. When we cut the feet, the amount of material that we have here is 6 millimeters. Okay, so I don't want to use the whole 6 mil, otherwise I've got nothing for the base to sit on. So I'm going to come up 3 millimeters, and I'm going to use my Lark tool to adjust that to the right size. So what I've got that is I've got that set on 3mm. Right. And so all I'm going to do is sit that against the router bit, and I'll bring my fence over the top of the router bit until it touches the ruler, and that gives me my 3mm. What a handy gadget that tool is, eh? And that gives me 3mm of router bit protruding from under the fence. I'm just going to lock that in place. Quite quick, quite simple. All right. Next step, mark the feet. Now, the feet, we've got pretty much what we call a square box. It's a little bit not square, like it's 90mm this way and 100mm that way, but it's pretty close to square. So I'm going to make sure that my feet are all exactly the same size when we do it. So I need to measure from down there to here. Okay, so I've got that set at 20mm. So on one piece of material, and because both pieces are different widths, $20mm. Now, I only mark one of each of the parts. This one here is just laying on its back like that. The trench furthest away, and I mark the left-hand side. Now, there's a reason for that, so I mark the left-hand side. And I'll do the same on this one. Again, 20mm. And I have to mark both because they're both different widths. You can see this one here is a little bit narrower than that one. So we need to adjust halfway through the process. And then when we set this up, we need a stop. So what I'm doing here, I'll just show you with the ruler so that you can see what I'm doing. That's the edge of my router bit. There. So what I want is I want my line on the left-hand side of the router bit. Now you don't have to be perfectly prescriptive about this. A little bit here and there was not going to make a great deal of difference. So we're on the left-hand side of the router bit. Put my fence up. Just lock this in place. Okay, so now I'm up against the fence. So what I can do is cut both of those on that same measurement. Now, the reason I only put one mark on is, and I'll show you that right now. We'll take a cut. So ears on, everybody. Now the reason, and this is very obvious here, the reason that I only put that mark there is because what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up here. So I've got a fresh, clean start there. Just got to clean that little bit of burn off there. That router bit actually needs sharpening, but you can see this tear out. It looks pretty ordinary. What we don't want is that to occur on the edge of the foot on that end. So if I just fold that back over, and if I turn it over and start again, ears on. So just by doing that, what's happened here is I've got a clean start there when I did the initial one, and now I've got a clean start there because I tipped it over, and nice clean cut all the way through, and I don't have any tear out. So, and the measurement is exactly the same because of where I've got the stop. So that's the reason that I only do that little bit. Now I've done one, so all I have to do is do the other. And if you look at this, we've got quite a bit of material for the base to actually sit on. And you can see I've gone from my measurement, and if you measured that, you'd find that that measurement would be the same as that. Okay, second one. There you go. And now for the other piece, and because they're a different thing, you can see when I put that here, when I sit my mark up against the left hand side of the router bit, you can see I've got a gap here on the other end, so I've got to adjust my stop. Bring the stop up to the right place. Clamp it in place. And just continue to do the same process. If I had a sharper router bit, it probably wouldn't make that much racket, but both pieces of timber are hardwood, so we are dealing with close grain. Okay, glue up time. Now, if you go back to last week, you'll probably have seen how I actually built all the components, how I made the base and so forth. So don't need that, don't need that. It's always a good idea to drop the router bit out of the way, it's a bit safe. Grab yourself a platform, and I always make sure that I clamp things in place. Even though I try to keep things as simple as possible, I still always go through the processes that give me the best results. So I don't take too many shortcuts. Find if you take shortcuts, you end up making mistakes all the time, and that means you've got to repair things all of the time. Don't like doing that really. Okay. Now before I pull that apart, I should have marked it, but I didn't do that. So I'm just going to have to make sure that I get it back in the right place. Incidentally, everything was sanded to about 600. That's inside and outside, just so that I don't have to do a lot of sanding afterwards. Particularly on the inside. It's really difficult to get on the inside. You've probably heard me say that a million times, but there's nothing better than being reminded. Okay, so when I glue up, I hold the front inside of the box in the palm of my hand, and that way I'm working from the outside of the box, and that way I don't get a whole lot of glue onto the inside section of the box, because what will happen is you'll end up with a lot of squeeze out on the inside of the box, which is really hard to get rid of. Brushes are just cheap little paint brushes. You can get them at Officeworks, or you can get them at Bunnings. Well, actually I don't know if you can get them at Bunnings. I used to buy lots of little brushes from Bunnings, but I noticed they don't have the ones I like anymore. Typical department store, eh? So, there's one in. This one's got to be that one. Yep. And my piece of base, 4mm. And I only put, when I put this in, I only put a little bit of glue in the centre of where the end grain is, because it's a floating base. It's a little smaller than the space we've got there. I've made it a little bit narrower and a little bit not as wide as the box, just to give me a little bit of room. I think I got that in. Generally work reasonably quickly. If you get yourself organised, you can see I've got all my bits and pieces all close handy. If you're organised, you will find that things will go relatively smoothly. And you can see I'm not putting a lot of glue in there. I'm putting enough in there to hold it, but not a real lot. A little bit in this. Looking good. As you can see, quite a nice fit. All I had to do was push it in. I didn't have to actually bash it with anything, but I'm going to squeeze it up. Like so. Now remember, these are only little boxes, and so if you're making bigger ones, the process is pretty much identical. Got a little bit of squeeze out in there, not that much, just a tiny bit. All good. Now just check for square. And as you can see, that's just perfectly square straight off the bat. It just fitted together so nicely. Making sure I haven't got any spaces around here. It's nice and clean. When we turn it over, you can see it's nice and clean around there. A little bit of glue in there. I'm not too concerned about the glue on the outside because we're going to sand those excess ends off our dovetails, and that'll be nice and flush. Okay, so that's our glue up. So that gets put aside now, and a little jar. Just shift all this stuff away. So if you're so inclined, you might give Pammy a thumbs up for her camera work. She has to struggle with my idiosyncrasies and the little things that I change in the process of things. So she does a wonderful job. So anyhow, next thing, put that aside. Okay, for this process, what we're going to do, I'll get the other box. Now what we're going to do with this box, this is the same box as I just put together, different material. What I want to do is I want to make sure that when the box is sitting flat like so, the first thing you do is get it flat so that it's going to sit flat on something. So a little bit of sandpaper and just make sure we're perfectly flat on the bottom. Now this has been glued and I've sanded off around the edges, right? So all I do is give it a nice little sand and that will give me a really flat surface on both of those, right? Now the next step is to make sure that this surface, that surface is parallel to your desk, and this surface is parallel to these two surfaces. Now that takes a little bit of work. The other thing we're going to do, and when we look at this box here, is I'm going to put a little bit of relief in here. Okay, so just a little bit of surface so that we've got something for the lid to actually sit on. Okay, so that's what we're going to do with this. Now, I didn't do it in the first box, but this one here looks a little bit nicer. So as you can see, the top of the piece of material is actually a little bit thinner than the dovetails. Now, if you want a wide piece there for support for the hinges, you need to make sure your piece of timber is a little bit thicker than what I would normally do. So this is 9mm. Normally I would use, if I was going to take a lot of material off, I'd make 10 or 11mm sides on it. Front and back would be 9mm, but the rest of it would be a little bit thicker, so that I could allow for that bit that I'm going to take off. So, take this out of here. I'm going to show you the router bit we use to do a lot of that work. The router bit we're going to be using is that one there. It's our tenon cutter. It's the one you get in our Ultimate Cutter Kit, or you can buy it as an individual. I'll just roll it down there so it doesn't fall over. You can purchase that in our Ultimate Cutter Kit or our Master Cutter Kit, or you can buy it individually if you like. So that's the router bit I'm going to use. Now the reason I'm using that one is because it's got a nice clean corner on the edge. Put that into there. Now, when I adjust the height of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run that along the edge of here. So I need to drop that down a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run along here. So I'll need a fence. Drop that in place. So this fence. This is the standard fence you get when you purchase one of our tables. You get a standard fence like this. It's a compact laminate, same as the top. Now here's where we adjust things to work. So adjust it to the corner of there. Tip it over and see if it touches exactly the same spot there. And it touches there. And it just touches that one there. So I might come in a little bit. And I'll clamp that in place. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to feed that across my router bit, there and there. Now the thing that you have to remember, safety is your big concern, because that router bit's sticking up through the router table there, and so what we need to do is move around and stay well away from that router bit. Now the round bit's going to spin in this way, which means in this direction, which means it's going to be pushing our piece of material against the fence, and that's exactly what we want it to do. Okay, so ears on, everybody. And now we have the two top surfaces are parallel to the bench. So if we tip it over, you can see it doesn't rock, it's perfectly flat. And it's nice and clean because we've used that router bit. Now what I want to do is I want to cut a little rebate in here. Okay? So to adjust this, use the same router bit. You can see, I'll just use my pencil as a pointer. You can see here, I'm just touching the bit. Right? So if I turn it around to the other side, it doesn't quite touch, it won't go underneath it. When I go back to this one here, you can see it goes underneath. So that's not going to work very well. So now I'll just check the other side. I've got to come up a tiny little bit. Let's see if that's working. Okay, so we're touching there, we're touching here, touching there, and we're just touching there. So what I've done is the distance from there to there, from the top of that to the top of that, is different over this side. So what I've got is I've got it touching whichever one it's the deepest, and then I'm just going to cut a section off. Now, how much do I take off? So I only want about 1 millimetre of a step. Okay, so you can guess it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be anything you like. So what we'll do now is readjust our fence. Up against the fence, and that's the section we're going to cut off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to feed that through there. Again, safety is your paramount thought. You need to be thinking about safety as you go through this. So what I want to do is I want to keep that up against the fence like so. With this hand, I'm going to push it this way. This hand, I'm going to keep well away from the router bit, but I'm going to hold the top lip, and I'm just got my fingers on the outside edge of my fence, and I'm just going to slide that across through there. Now, take it easy. Don't have to push it hard. You don't have to put a lot of pressure on it. You just need to go steady. Okay, because all we're going to do is take off a little sliver. Okay. Ears on. Okay, now you can see, where did I put that pencil? You can see I have a little shelf there. It's not actually big enough for what I want. So I'm going to have to bring my fence in a tiny bit more. Not very much, just a little bit. And just redo that. You can see I have a much nicer shelf there now. It's a lot deeper in the shelf. You also see that I've actually taken out a little bit of material off the top of that surface there and the top of that surface there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut the other side, and then I'm going to take out that little bit of material that's in the middle of that. So, we turn it over. So now I have, this shelf is parallel to that surface. The top of that section there is parallel to that and that. The only bit that isn't is this little bit in the middle here. So what we do is we take that out with the router bit set where it is. So this is the easiest way to do it. Shift your fence out of the way. Turn the box upside down. And again, be very, very careful. And there you have, the box is ready to actually build the lid. So I've got this surface and this surface are parallel to each other. That and that surface are parallel to these two sides as well. So the whole box is actually quite flat. And it looks really neat. And it's nice and clean because the router bit has done the job. And all we need to do now is drill the holes for the hinges. But we're not going to do that just yet. We have to make the jig. But before that, I want to make the lid. So the first thing we need to do, and I'll have to go over to the drop saw for this one. Just got to find the piece of material. I've cut a piece of material that's bigger than the space that we want. So what I need to do is I need to cut a piece that was going to fit snugly between those two shoulders. So my piece of material is 80. It's going to be 87 millimeters. So I'll just measure my 87 millimeters. Okay, over to the drop saw. Now I've cut this a little bit wider than I need because I'm going to sneak up on the fit. You'll also notice when you see my piece of timber, I've got overhang at back and front. Now I need that there for the next process, but I'm just going to sneak up on this cut. Just going to take a little bit more off. Not quite in there yet. All I'm doing is cutting off the set of the teeth on the saw blade, which isn't very much in most cases. Perfect. Fits in there brilliantly. Okay, so we've got a nice snug. So back to the bench. Now what I need to do is I need to create this little section here. Okay, so we're going to have a little play with that. For that, it's a three-step process. the router bits that we're going to use, not that one, we're going to be using these router bits to do that process. So we've got our core box bit, the smallest of our rounding over bits, which is it's a 1/4 inch, I think, and the straight bit, which is that one there, of course, the straight bit out of our A10 cutter kit. So, of course, the other thing is, of course, the collet reducer. So let's get rid of some of this, and we'll cut that first bit. Incidentally, the other thing that we're going to use is a new jig that we had to build, and if you look back through some of our programs, some of our shows, you'll see that I've made a box, a loose, an uneven sided box with a lid on it, and in that process I built this jig. That's a smaller version of this, only it doesn't have, it gives you that shape that's on there, but it doesn't have a toggle on it. So there's nowhere to put it on that one. Well, I could put it on there, but it's a smaller version of that because we're working with a smaller piece of material. Okay, let's get rid of that out of the way. So the first thing we need to do is we need to use the core box bit. Get rid of this. This is what we're doing here with the core box bit. What I'm going to do, and you can use any size core box bit you like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the curve underneath there. Okay? So that's our first step. The second step is to create the curve over the top. And the third step is to remove the excess from the front edges of the box. For that you need a wider piece than the box itself, because then we can trim the thing down to fit the box. So core box bit, choose the nicest bit to be either on the inside or the outside, depending on where you want the box to look. This one here is pretty good all round. So when we set this up, I don't know if I tightened that, I better check. Let's tighten that. When we set this up, what I need to do is I need to work out where I want my curve. So if I want the curve here so that I can round over the top edge, so I've got to work out where I want this to be sitting. So I generally come down about halfway. Now how far I want it to come in depends on how far I set the fence so that it sits up here. So we're going to shift those out of the way, shift that out of the way, shift that out of the way, and I'll grab my fence. I'm going to have to turn the table around. Now, depending on where I want this to be, which side, I'll have it on that side where I did my pencil mark. So about there, I'm just a little over halfway And if you want further distance from here into here, use a bigger core box bit. And you can buy them in from Carby Tool. They've got about 4 or 5 different sizes. So, okay, ears on. Make sure you're using a push block. Sit that over the top, and we just cut that through there. And there we have our curve from underneath. Now I need to round over the top surface. So we'll keep the fence in place because we're going to need that. Move this around a bit. Like I said, lots of fiddly little bits and pieces today, so hopefully you're keeping up with it. Now the router bit that I'm rounding it over with is our smallest one. You can use a bigger one if you like. And what I also want is I want a little step on the top. So when we adjust the height of this one, turn it over like so. Actually, I think what I might do is I might go to a wider one so that you've got a better vision of it. The smaller one actually is so small it's really hard to see. So I'll go to the next size up, round a bit. This will give you probably a better view. Try again. So I want a little step on it. Step only has to be tiny, so you can see them just to there. And now bring it up, just put it against the bearing and pull the fence to the bearing. That'll give you a nice little step. I might take that down a tiny bit. How much have we got there now? Just nice. Okay, lock that in place. So again, it's all about judgment. It's all about adjusting things, doing things that you like. Just make sure that's correct. Yep. And experimenting. Okay, ears on. You can see the difference. See, now I have that shape with my little step on the top. You can see the difference between the two router bits. This is the small one and this is the bigger one. Now don't worry about that little bit of furry bit on the end there. We'll sand that up when we get sorted, but you can see the difference between the two. So depending on what you want to do and how you want it to look, it's basically up to you. So now what we need to do is we need to scallop out both sides of that. So again, change of everything. So I don't need the fence this time. I do move my little jig. And so what's going to happen is that's going to sit on there. And I'm going to remove the outside edges. Now I've got a little bit of a space there, so I need to fill that space. So if I put that in there, that'll get me pretty close. What I'm looking for here is to make sure that I've got this out to the outside edge of that surface there. So I'm going to take off that. So that's not actually going to work, that one. Let's try do a bigger one. look underneath. That's actually a little bit too big. Let's see what else I've got here. So all I'm doing is adjusting. That should do it. That'll make it nice. So ears on, everybody. Oh, I better change the route a bit. So now we're going to the straight cutter. Adjust my height. Funny comment.
Yeah. Gary Wilkins says you've got a screw loose.
You've only just worked that out, Gary. I got many screws loose, mate. Okay, here we go. I better explain what I'm going to do. I'm going to trim out here. Now, I've got this set so that I've just got a small little section that will be left behind. So I'm going to cut away a little bit at a time. The bearing is going to run against the edge of that, of course, right? Now, the idea is to make sure that when you cut this out, your surface is flat here where it goes into the curve. Otherwise, you end up with a little rebate where you don't want it. So you can see that this protrudes past there. That's the distance from the bearing to the cutting tooth. All right, so it's going to give us a clean cut through there so you don't get any tear out. Now, I could go straight in and just go straight along. But what would happen there would be, because we're running along the grain, I'd probably peel off a big piece of material and end up with damage that I don't want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit at a time. So I'm just going to keep peeling it away a little bit at a time so that I don't do any damage to it. So ears on. Flip it over. Voila. So now I have a little lifter. So a little bit of tidy up and that'll look really, really nice. Now where's the box? Here's the box. And when I put it in the box, that's what it's going to look like. On the box. Right. So now I need to dress it to size. So I'm just going to let it hang over a little bit over the front, just so as I've got something to sand off a little bit later down the track. Go clamp that in place, and then I'm going to cut it to size after I mark it. Make sure I've got that in the right place. Okay, over to the saw. tiny bit wider than I need, but basically there's my lid, and all we need to do now is hinge it. And this is the point where we said right at the beginning we're going to give you a couple of techniques on how to hinge little boxes. This is just the extra bits and pieces that I've added to it by putting in little handles and doing a particular type of box and so forth. So this is where we get our hinging sorted. You can see that I am below the lips, right? My piece of material is 10 millimeters thick. I think this one's 10 mil. I'll just check that. Might be 9 mil. I've done a couple of smaller ones and a couple of larger ones in my demos lately. What have we got here? 9.76. So pretty close to 10 mil. 9.78 on that side. So it's okay. It's tolerant. Pretty good. A piece of sandpaper I had here before is gone. So what I want to do now is I have to make the jig. Now, I made a jig a couple of weeks ago for 10 mil material. That was it. And then I built, that one was for that box. And then I built this one here for this box. Now, that's 9 millimeter material, so I had to make a new jig. So yesterday I made that one. Now, the difference between the two, we're not going to get this made today, but I'm going to explain it to you anyway. The difference between the two is what we want is we want our hole pretty much in the center of our piece of material. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit towards the top, but pretty much towards the center. The thickness of the material is half the distance, well, half the thickness of the material, I should say, is the distance to the center of the hole this way. Right? So what's going to happen is we're going to have to cut a curve here to give relief so that you can open the box. So you need that relief so that you can get the box to open. So it's important that you get your jig correctly made so that we've got room to actually create that curve. And remember, it is half the thickness of your piece of material from the outside edge to the center of that hole. Okay, that way it'll be flush on the back of the box as well. So it's got to sit quite nicely into there. So that's the focus. Now, if you have made one of these, this one is made for 10 mil because the distance from that to the center of that hole is 5 millimeters. The distance of the center of this hole to the outside edge is 4.5 millimeters. Okay, and the distance from the inside to the center of the hole is 4.5 as well. Okay, so that's for my 9 mil. This is for my 10 mil. So this will probably work with here. I might not need to make another jig, but I have to show you how to make it anyway. So the easiest way to do it is find your center. And, got it right the first time. And you can see, I don't know if you can see in the hole, you can see actually the hole, the line runs right through the middle of the hole. And you need to have that on that side, and you also need to have it on that side. All right, so you've got two holes to drill, and they've got to be accurate. Reason being is one set of holes is going to be there, and the other set of holes is the other side is going to be drilled there, and they need to be in perfect line with each other. That way you're going to get a reasonable pivot, and the pivot's going to be perfect, and hopefully that'll do. So we'll make the jig next week. We'll drill and fit. We run out of time today. There's only 4 minutes to go. So if you've got any questions that you want to bring up, please put them up. I haven't answered anything today, but I will try and answer a few tomorrow. So I'll just jump onto this camera here. If you've got any questions on there at the moment, I haven't answered anything there at the moment, so I'll do that through the week. I'll read what you've said, and we'll go through all your questions probably the week after. So we'll make the little jig, and we'll drill the holes. Now I've got particular drill bits that I use for those sorts of things, so we're going to have a little play with that as well, and then we'll hinge the whole lot together, and we'll finish off the box, and then we'll talk about the next project that we're going to do with a very similar box. Okay, so the next set of hinges is going to be after this one. The pin hinges is going to be stop hinges, the small 19mm stop hinges. So we may make a bigger box, just a little bit bigger, but I might make that off camera, and then I'll bring it in and we'll just show you how to put the hinges in it, and that might be probably the best way to go about that one. Because we've already made the box, you don't need to sort of blather on about that again, so we'll go from there. Now, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe to it. Remember, you need to be a member or a subscribed member to be able to join the chat, and as you can see, there's lots of chat going on there for those newbies, and you can join in, and yeah, maybe you'll learn something, or maybe you could teach me something. So we'll take it from there. Anyway, so have a good week, everybody, and I will see you all next Sunday.